Greg.
Good. All right, we can go. Good. All right, good evening. We will now convene the committee, the Finance and Ways and Means Committee meeting for January 19th, 2021. And welcome to 2021. This committee meeting represents my commitment to keeping council members and citizens informed, and further represents my intent for this committee to continue to receive quarterly financial updates from the finance director. The updates we received in 2020 proved very valuable in keeping council members informed and updated on a recurring basis. So I look forward to the presentation. Bill, any comments?
Nope.
Sandy, any initial comments?
Sandy can't hear you.
Sandy, can you hear me? Oh, okay. I'll take that as a no then. Also, before we receive the report, all of us on council and this committee received a document from Amanda Gamby, Sustainability Coordinator, titled 2020 Waste Diversion Report. And I have no intention of discussing that. That won't be briefed. However, if any member of this committee has any questions concerning that document, this would be the appropriate time to ask. However, I appreciate that report. That's been extremely valuable as well throughout 2020.
I just the graphs are very good in terms of conveying the message. I appreciate that. And the report that Amanda put together is really well written. It's detailed enough and short. It's very, very helpful. So if you could relay to Amanda that it was put together very well, gives us everything we need, I'd appreciate it.
Right, and that 38.5% diversion rate, it'll be interesting to see if that sustains itself throughout 2021. Okay, very good. Well, I think we will now receive a report from our finance director, Mr. Bouchard.
Very good evening. The presentation tonight is going to focus on how we ended 2020. We've been working in the finance department. That's usually end of the year, beginning of the January is our busiest time in the office, kind of wrapping up the prior year and getting the new year opened up so that all of our business can continue and take place. And kind of, I won't say the last, but one of the very last steps really we just did last Friday. So we're feeling good that we're finally putting 2020 behind us. But there's some interesting information here tonight. So next slide. So we're going to talk, as we have before, about income tax. That's our, other than electric revenues, that's our single largest source of revenue. But I don't want to lose sight that there's lots of other categories of revenue that we get as well. But we'll talk about income tax, how we did, about our CARES Act funding, the refunds we got from workers' comp, and then we'll look at the funds and how those all were impacted by those. All right, next slide. Income tax. We projected originally pre-COVID that we would receive in the neighborhood of $21.6 million for the year. And then COVID occurred, the pandemic occurred, business activity certainly was impacted. And we had been updating you with where we thought that might be throughout the year. And I think our, of course, as the further in you get, the more better information you have. But we were very close to what our ending up projection was going to be. So we ended the year at $20,155,000, short by $1,455,000. And that's about a 6.7% decrease. And I think we had compared that to the 2008, 2009 kind of time frame to give ourselves a benchmark. And those were very similar. This is not quite as bad, but we were right in the ballpark of that. Also, with our 2021 budget, as we looked at that, we knew by the time we were doing the budget that we were going to have reduced income tax. And so our 2021 was based on a projection of us receiving $20 million for 2020. So again, very close. And that calculates into a 4.2% increase that we're expecting in 2021 for income tax. This is a chart you've seen often and kind of lays out that income tax by month and our totals. So that really repeats the information we had. Our original estimate was 21.6 million. We ended up at 1.455, less than that. If you look at the 2019 column, you'll notice in 2019, we brought in just over 21 million. And so we're hoping in 2021 that that's about where we'll be with income tax as well. So that's where we're at on income tax. CARES Act was certainly a big part of discussions and funding. Part of that discussion was what can we use it for? But really, even before we talked about what can we use it for, we knew that the federal government had passed the act, had granted money to the state, but we didn't know right away when we were going to get or if we were going to get a component of that until several months later. So our first distribution came to us $745,000 at the end of June. We got a little bit more then as the year progressed with a big second distribution in October. So kind of late in the year, they were trying to keep us updated, but we didn't know that at the beginning of the pandemic. We didn't know that at the beginning of the year, certainly. All totaled, we received $2.4 million in CARES Act funding for the city, which was a huge help. I have to report those dollars back to the state, which we've done so far. And the bottom half of this slide really outlines the categories that the federal government wants those back in. And so that activity level is prescribed by reporting that the state passed along to us. The largest portion of that, as we have said all along, there were questions about the rules and what could we spend it on. The one that really became solidified after some discussion and debate was that it was for safety forces, and that was the big intent. And so that's a bulk of where those dollars went. So 1.7 million is really what we did for safety forces. You can see on that other part that we spent public health and safety, which was really, when people had to stay at home, part of those expenses. We bought some equipment for our ambulances, fire truck, touchless fixtures, some of those kind of things was kind of that second largest area of expenditure. So we spent 2.388 by December 31st. The new act that was passed by Congress and subsequently approved by the state gives us another year to spend our remaining $25,000. Really, that's already been earmarked. We had it encumbered prior to the end of the year. We just didn't get the bill by the end of December. So that was pretty remarkable. That was a big help to us. If we go to the next slide, those dollars that we received really didn't just benefit one fund, although one fund primarily, because that's where we spend all our safety forces, but 11 different funds had the benefit of that. Safety forces, again, were the primary piece of that, and the general fund certainly had the largest chunk of that because that's where we pay our safety forces, police and fire. But also utilities, parks and rec also were benefactors of some of those dollars. And that was in part some of the protective things we put up. in parks, all the touchless features in the restrooms and doors and all those kind of things, as well as trying to make that some of the rooms that they have accessible so that we could hold meetings in there virtually. And that's just getting completed. The other big piece that we had talked about was Bureau of Workers' Compensation and the refunds that they were able to give to us. And similar to CARES Act, we got that in several different distributions. We didn't get it all at once. As a matter of fact, the largest distribution we didn't get till December. We knew it was coming a little bit before that, so we did have some advance notice, but late in the year. But again, that was very well received. We distribute that based on where it was spent. And workers' comp really ends up being a percentage of our salaries. And so those dollars went back into wherever those salaries were spent. So that means that 17 different funds got money back on that. General fund, again, 755,000. Park and Rec, the levy funds for both police and fire, and utilities, the three funds there, because we pay a lot of folks in the utilities area, that had about $580,000 that came back to the utility area from workers' compensation.
How's that compare to previous year?
Well, we received $1.7 million in money back. Our annual bill for workers' compensation is roughly $300,000. So that's a big difference. So it was multiple years really over that was refunded to us.
Okay.
All right, so if you just take those two items, the CARES Act and workers' compensation, those had a big impact on the general fund. The workers' compensation really came in as revenue to us. The CARES Act was not designed as revenue replacement. And part of this is maybe just the accounting piece of that, but CARES Act was really expenditure reduction. They were covering some of our safety forces, so it's shown on the expense side. Council approved Fund 2010 is where those dollars resided, and we moved expenses or eligible items into that fund. So it's a reduction in expense. So the CARES Act and workers' comp on their own had about a $2.8 million impact on our bottom line. Had we not had that, we'd been $2.8 million less in cash. So that maybe makes a little sense too with this slide combined with the next one of where we really ended the general fund budget. We had a estimate of $17.4 million for revenue, and we actually received, I'm sorry, just short of that. So between workers' comp and some of our other areas, we kept up very well. And expenditures with our budget plus our purchase orders that carried over from the prior year, we could have spent $19.177 million. We were only at $15.5 million in expenditures. I think that's a combination of a couple things. First of all, early on when the CARES Act, early on when the pandemic struck, we took some initial action. The board took some initial action. We froze budgets. We froze salaries. We asked departments for reductions in their budget, and the departments really responded and did a very excellent job of really looking at that. That was the first thing we did. Then on top of the fact, then we got CARES Act dollars that we were able to move expenditures. Those two things really helped I mentioned the timing of some of the CARES Act funds and the workers' compensation funds because those came late in the year. And so it was really kind of a combination of our early action and then the dollars that came later in the year that really gave us a very positive year. So it's hard to put a negative spin on this, even for the finance director. I say that tongue in cheek, but we had a very good year thanks to CARES Act and refunds from workers' comp. All right, so our charts that you're very familiar with, we wanted to run through the general fund. You look at 2020, that green line on the screen, the black and white line on your copies that you have, but our balance certainly took a nice increase in 2020. So primarily CARES Act, primarily workers' comp. We knew that when we put the 21 budget together, that was coming. We anticipated the larger increase. A piece of that we talked about too in the budget development was we sold the Huntington building. We got the revenue for that already. The bill won't come due until the bond anticipation note is due in May. So the revenue came in 20. We have that expenditure in 21. So we know that we are going to dip into that 2021 cash amount that we had, but we knew we were going to be able to do that based on how we were projecting 2020 was going to end. All right, next slide. The other funds that we want to look at is typically we look at all the funds that get income tax dollars. And so really that's what we're going to do as we look at that. And we'll go through those slides quickly, but I think there's a couple interesting things. First of which, Park and Recreation gets a small slice of income tax. If you look at the top two lines there, that's their revenue and expenditure. And if you look at that, what I think is a great testament to Park and Rec staff and Kristen over there is that COVID was really tough on Parks and Rec when suddenly you can't do any of the activities, and the fact that 1/3 of your budget comes from people participating in activities and paying for that participation. Suddenly when that's kind of pulled away from you, they had to react, and the chart shows that they reacted very well. So those two lines being in parallel, part of that was they got some workers' comp refund money. They were participants, recipients of that, but they really worked to control those expenses. It was a hard decision on some of those things. Not to open the pool was a hard decision. But I think we can look at this point and say that financially was a good decision. We're hoping that 2021 will look much better. We're projecting kind of a rebound in that. We've been a little conservative with that. We don't certainly expect it to be completely back up, but certainly heading in that direction. All right, next slide. Our police levy. So we're going to go through these, but the things that we watch for is that our cash balance stays above that target fund balance. That target fund balance is what council set for us back in 2007 as a target amount, and we work hard to stay above that. And so we watch that. We look at that balance line and look at the consistency of that and to see where we're going to be. And as long as we're above that target balance, we're feeling like we're doing well. Again, they had a bump up in 20 because of the workers' compensation that came back into that fund. And we always juggle a little bit between the general fund because general fund also pays a lot of our safety forces. And so we can juggle those back and forth a little bit. Same with the fire levy. We're looking at that, and in 19 we had reached up above that target line for the first time. 2021, we're still going to be above that target. And what we're seeing there is just kind of the reflection of the income tax. That's the only source of revenue for that fund and the police fund. So as income tax goes, so does our police and levy revenue. Next, Water and Sewer Capital Improvement Fund. This one is always a very interesting chart because the ups and downs also reflect the fact of when we have a large either grant or loan that we take out for a large project. So sometimes you'll see this looking very jagged. But one of the things you'll notice is the balance, the kind of lime green there over time. Our balance has been pretty consistent in that fund. And so if you kind of look at some of those numbers, certainly that's been a very positive thing that it's been as consistent as it is and above that target, certainly. 2021 looks as though it's going to dip below that, but part of that depends on how many actual projects we do. And certainly we didn't have near as many projects this year because of COVID and just getting contracts and workers and everything situated. So that activity was less. All right. Our capital improvements, and I'm going to skip past that quickly because, again, there's not a lot of news there because we're feeling comfortable with that balance, that target. And, you know, they saw the impact of income tax, but in 2021, we're trying to match those things up. And next slide, street repair fund. Certainly, we've had lots of discussions about street repair. We're trying to figure out how we can do more with less. But we're, that gets a small piece of the income tax, and we use it as much as we can. The spikes in this one also depend sometimes on federal programs, grants, cost sharings that we get with ODOT, TMACOG funding, tip money as well. So that's why some of those jump up and down. All right. So having said that and looking at those graphs, well, we had a better 2020 than any of us really would have guessed when we were in the middle of a pandemic. And that was certainly thanks to CARES Act dollars that the state distributed to us, as well as the return of multiple years of premium to us from Bureau of Workers' Compensation. That, I think, along with our early action, helped us save jobs, helped keep our employment level. We appreciate the unions working with us, and we think that was very needed. You know, it looks great now, but we didn't know that till later in the year. And so we appreciate them stepping up and working with us. The increased cash balance that we have, we projected as we were building the budget, and we knew that things weren't going to bounce back entirely into next year. We knew we were going to need to use some of that cash, and part of that's we're kind of looking at it as a cash flow timing issue. We got the cash in 2020. We're going to need some of it in 2021. So the budget council approved in the general fund really has us using about $1 million so that we can maintain things on an even keel. And we have the cash. That's rainy day things are for. So, and finally, as we look at borrowing into the future and our bond issuance coming up here, rating agencies love to see cash. Cash is king. So I think we're going to be in good shape for that. So that concludes my remarks, pending any questions.
No, I don't have any questions. I want to thank you for another detailed report. I think this sets the stage for the year coming up. I know there'll be additional challenges. The situation will change. I doubt we'll see workers' compensation funding again, for example. But again, these quarterly reports are very helpful in keeping council on track and making the end of the year much easier to deal with. But you give a lot of credit to that influx of funds, but it's also you and everyone else in the administration just being good stewards of the taxpayers' money, and I thank you for that. I appreciate it. Bill?
No, just thank you. And if any alarms go off at any point, we'd be really happy to hear about it.
Yep, we will certainly let you know. As you know, we watch it constantly. So
Sandy, do you have any comments?
still muted, I think.
Can't hear you.
Muted me again.
Now try. Whoop.
Okay, now do you have me?
Now we got you.
Every time they were muting me, I was unmuting myself. And so it was, we were
Hmm.
playing around with that. I just want to say how proud I am for living in a town like Bowling Green, where we are still afforded very wonderful governmental services, very adequate, very professionally performed services. And yet we are able to keep our budget in check from year to year. And this year being especially painful and very scary. I think our residents again need to be reminded that the city they're living in is exceptional in managing their monies. And it's due to our staff, our administration, and the people that support us with their tax money. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. Well, thank you again very much.
Thanks.
And this
Yep.
will conclude the Finance and Ways and Means Committee meeting. Thank you.
Can I ask if I should just go all the way out and come back in at 6:45 for the next meeting?
Sandy, I would say just turn off the video. That'd be okay.
I will do
And-
that.
Yep, and mute yourself.
This could be interesting.